When an arrogant billionaire refuses to stand for a black judge, no one expects what happens next. What she does next will leave you speechless. Can justice truly prevail against privilege? Watch and find out. The courtroom buzzed like a swarm of restless bees, the tension thick in the air. The benches were packed shoulder to shoulder, the crowd's eyes darting to the defendant's table. Whispers rippled across the room, each one more sensational than the last. Then he entered, a tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. His confident stride bordered on arrogance. His slick-back hair caught the fluorescent light as he smirked at the spectators, as if they were there to celebrate him, not see him held accountable. This was Ethan Grayson. For weeks, his name had dominated every headline. But instead of the somber demeanor of man accused of financial ruin, he looked like the guest of honor. However, it wasn't his entrance that left the crowd speechless, it was what followed when Judge Monica Lee arrived. Draped in her black judicial robe, Judge Lee walked to the bench with an air of quiet authority. She didn't need to speak or look around to command respect. Her very presence did that. Known for her commitment to fairness, her reputation as a no-nonsense judge was well established. All rise for the Honorable Judge Monica Lee, the bailiff announced. The room stood in unison. Everyone except Ethan Grayson. The room fell into a deafening silence as all eyes shifted to the defendant, still seated. With a casual air, he leafed through a legal pad, as though the court proceedings were no more than an inconvenience. His attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, but Ethan merely waved him off with a dismissive flick of his hand. Judge Lee, now at her bench, paused. Her expression remained calm, but the weight of the moment was unmistakable. The murmurs from the crowd swelled like a growing wave, disbelief rippling through the room. How could he show such disrespect? Ethan's face betrayed no remorse. He leaned back, his smug expression as if daring her to react. You may be seated, Judge Lee said, her tone measured but firm. She didn't address his defiance, at least, not yet. But the atmosphere in the room was irrevocably changed. The tension grew thick enough to choke on. This was just the beginning. Ethan Grayson was about to learn a lesson that even immense wealth couldn't shield anyone from the consequences of their actions. Ethan wasn't just rich, he was obscenely wealthy. With luxury yachts, sprawling estates on both coasts, private and high society parties, his life epitomized excess. His company, Grayson Investments, was once hailed as a symbol of financial prowess. But beneath the glamour was a foundation built on deceit. Grayson's empire thrived on manipulation, preying on middle-class families and small business owners. He offered them dreams of financial security, enticing them to invest their life savings. Retirement accounts, college funds, and even family inheritances all vanished in his schemes. The consequences were catastrophic. Families lost their homes, parents struggled to feed their children, and elderly couples faced their twilight years in devastating poverty. The ripple effects of his greed extended far and wide. To Ethan, though, it was nothing more than business. When investigators finally closed in, the evidence against him was staggering. Falsified documents, shady bank transactions, and whistleblower testimonies painted a damning picture. But even as his empire crumbled, Ethan remained confident. The best lawyers money can buy will handle this, he told reporters outside his Malibu mansion. It'll blow over. It always does. For a time, it seemed like he might be right. His legal team filed motion after motion, delaying the trial for months. They framed him as an ambitious entrepreneur unfairly targeted, a scapegoat for others' failures. But no legal strategy could bury the overwhelming evidence or silence the heartbreak of his victims. The trial finally began in San Francisco, and every day the courtroom overflowed with those seeking justice. Among them was Angela Martinez, a widowed mother of 3, who had lost her home after trusting Ethan. Her youngest daughter had to abandon college. Beside her was Peter Vaughn, a retired firefighter who had poured his savings in Ethan's schemes, only to end up living in his brother's spare room. Their stories and many more were laid bare during the trial. Angela's voice broke as she recounted her struggle. I begged them not to take my house, she said, tears streaking her face. But they didn't care. My kids and I slept in our car for weeks. Do you know what that's like? Peter's words were equally searing. I spent decades running into burning buildings, risking my life, he said, anger heavy in his voice. And this man burned my future to the ground without a second thought. And yet, through it all, Ethan barely reacted. He lounged in his chair, scrolling through his phone, whispering to his lawyer, or stifling yawns. To him, the testimonies were just noise, irrelevant stories that wouldn't change the outcome he was certain was in his favor. The media pounced, painting him as a symbol of arrogance and entitlement. Headlines screamed about his lack of remorse and blatant disrespect for the court. Public opinion turned against him in a tidal wave of outrage. But Ethan didn't care. Public opinion doesn't write checks, he'd sneer, brushing off the backlash. Mr. Grayson's lawyer claimed deep regret for the damage caused, but Ethan remained confident the truth would eventually clear him. The reality? Ethan had no plans to admit guilt. He was gambling the system would back him once more as it always had. But this time, Ethan had miscalculated Judge Monica Lee wasn't someone he could manipulate. If you find these stories inspiring and they motivate you to take action, please comment 9. If not, comment 0. Your feedback means a lot to us. Thank you for your valuable time. The trial became a public spectacle. News vans crowded the street outside the courthouse, and reporters jostled for positions to capture every detail. Inside the courtroom, the tension grew with each passing day. Witness after witness took the stand, each adding another nail to Ethan Grayson's proverbial coffin. But it wasn't just the testimonies that shocked the audience, it was Ethan's demeanor. On the third day of the trial, the prosecution presented a bombshell piece of evidence. A series of emails showing that Ethan had explicitly instructed his team to fabricate documents and deceive investors. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutor read aloud Ethan's words, "Make the numbers look good. We need these fools to sign the deal." The statement hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Angela Martinez, seated in the front row, shook her head in disbelief. Peter Vaughn clenched his fists. "And Ethan?" He smirked. The prosecutor turned to him, her voice icy. "Mr. Grayson, do you recognize this email?" Before Ethan could respond, his attorney quickly interjected. "Objection. This question has been asked and answered in prior hearings." Judge Lee raised her hand, her tone calm but firm. "Overruled. The defendant will answer the question." Ethan leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Yes, I recognize it. But don't pretend it means what you're implying. It's just business talk. You wouldn't understand." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, silenced only by the sharp crack of the judge's gavel. "Order in the court," Judge Lee demanded, her voice cutting through the noise. She turned to Ethan, her expression stern. "Mr. Grayson, I suggest you choose your words carefully. This is not a corporate boardroom." But Ethan remained unfazed. If anything, he seemed to relish the drama, treating the entire process as a game. Throughout the trial, his arrogance only grew. He interrupted witnesses with sarcastic laughter, rolled his eyes during cross-examinations, and whispered to his attorney during key moments. The spectators were incredulous, watching him turn the courtroom into his personal stage. Then came the day Angela Martinez took the stand. She approached with trembling hands clutching a folded piece of paper. Her voice quivered as she began, but every word carried the weight of her pain. "I trusted him," she said, looking directly at Ethan. "I trusted him with everything I had, and he destroyed my family's future." Ethan didn't even look at her. He leaned back in his chair, casually scrolling through his phone. "Your Honor," the prosecutor interrupted, pointing toward Ethan. "The defendant is clearly not paying attention to the witness." All eyes turned to Judge Lee. Her face remained composed, but there was a flicker of restrained anger in her gaze. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "put your phone down. Now." Ethan glanced up, unfazed. "I'm just checking something important," he replied, holding up the phone as if to justify his actions. The judge's tone sharpened. "I said now." For a moment, it seemed he might argue, but he reluctantly set the phone down. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, but the damage had been done. Angela continued her testimony, but her voice carried a note of disillusionment, as if she couldn't fathom such blatant disrespect. By the end of her statement, there wasn't a dry eye in the room except for Ethan's. A week later, the prosecution rested its case, leaving the defense to present theirs. Ethan's lawyer tried everything, discrediting witnesses, twisting the narrative, even painting Ethan as a victim of overzealous prosecutors. But the cracks were too deep to cover. Through it all, Judge Lee remained a steady presence. She rarely spoke, but her authority loomed over the courtroom like an unshakable force. Yet it was clear to everyone that her patience with Ethan's antics was wearing thin. The trial entered its final day. The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating, the anticipation almost unbearable. Reporters filled the back rows, pens poised and cameras trained on the front. The gallery was packed with victims, their faces a mixture of anger and hope. All eyes were on Judge Monica Lee as she prepared to deliver the verdict. Ethan Grayson sat at the defense table, his posture as relaxed as ever. He even had the audacity to flash a slight smile toward the cameras capturing his every move. He didn't look like a man facing judgment. He looked like someone who believed he'd already won. When Judge Lee finally spoke, the room fell silent. "Mr. Grayson," she began, her voice steady and resolute, "you have been found guilty on all charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the testimony of the victims has painted a clear picture of your actions. You manipulated, exploited, and destroyed countless lives, all for your personal gain." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. The judge spoke firmly. "During this trial, you have displayed an utter lack of remorse. Your conduct in this courtroom has been nothing less than disgraceful. You have insulted the victims, disrespected this court, and acted as though these proceedings were beneath you." The audience stirred, whispers passing through the crowd. Angela Martinez, seated in the front row, gripped her hands tightly, her knuckles pale. Judge Lee's tone grew colder as she continued, "Justice, Mr. Grayson, is not determined by wealth, power, or privilege. It is about responsibility. And today you will face the consequences of your actions." The silence in the room was almost tangible, broken only by the faint rustle of papers. For the first time, Ethan's confident smirk wavered as he adjusted his posture in the chair. "Therefore," the judge declared, her voice firm, "I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Ethan's expression froze, his face pale as the reality sank in. 25 years. He had anticipated a mild punishment, a few months in a comfortable facility. Perhaps, but this was unthinkable for someone of his status. Judge Lee wasn't done. "Additionally, I am ordering the immediate liquidation of your assets to compensate the victims of your crimes. Every dollar you wrongfully took will be returned to the families you have harmed." The room erupted into a wave of astonished murmurs. Tears streamed down Angela Martinez's cheeks as she pressed her hands to her face. In another corner, Peter Vaughn leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide with shock. Ethan shot to his feet, his face flushed with fury. "You can't do this," he yelled, his voice reverberating through the room. "I'm Ethan Grayson. You have no right to treat me like some common criminal." The judge brought her gavel down with authority, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Grayson, sit down." But Ethan refused to yield. "This is outrageous. I'll appeal. I'll ruin your career." The bailiffs inched closer, prepared to intervene. Judge Lee maintained her composure, her voice cutting through his tirade like a blade. "This is my courtroom, Mr. Grayson, and you will conduct yourself with respect." Bailiffs removed the defendant. As the officers escorted him out, Ethan's protests echoed faintly behind him, growing weaker with each step. The courtroom erupted into applause, a rare occurrence, but one that felt entirely justified. Judge Lee turned to the room, her expression softening ever so slightly. "Justice has been served," she stated. "Let this stand as a reminder. No one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." As the room gradually emptied and cameras flashed outside, one question lingered in the minds of all present. Would this punishment truly change a man like Ethan Grayson? By the courthouse steps, Angela Martinez stood clutching her bag. A reporter approached with a microphone. "How do you feel about today's outcome?" Angela hesitated, then replied, "I feel relieved. But the truth is, no sentence can undo the harm he caused. My children and I are still trying to rebuild. At least now we can look forward to a better future." Nearby, Peter Vaughn was speaking to a friend. "It's not just about the years he got," he said, shaking his head. "It's about the message it sends. People like him think they're untouchable. Not anymore." Inside her office, Judge Monica Lee sat silently, gazing out the window at the commotion below. She felt no triumph, no personal satisfaction, only a steadfast sense of purpose. Her duty was not about victories, but about ensuring justice and reminding everyone that fairness could prevail, even against wealth and privilege. Ethan Grayson's name would dominate headlines for some time, but for those he wronged, a chapter was finally closing. While the financial restitution would allow many to rebuild, the emotional scars would take far longer to heal. In the weeks that followed, the case sparked national conversations about accountability and the importance of holding the powerful to the same standards as everyone else. People shared their own experiences of injustice, finding hope in the verdict. One moment stood out above all. A letter from Angela's youngest daughter, Sophia, published in a local newspaper. "Thank you for standing up for my family," it read. "Thank you for proving that people like Ethan Grayson can't get away with hurting people like us." You didn't just deliver justice, you gave us a chance to start again. The story of Ethan Grayson's trial was more than just a courtroom drama. It became a symbol of resilience, integrity, and the belief that justice, no matter how difficult, can prevail. As you reflect on this, ask yourself, what does accountability mean to you? How can you ensure that fairness and justice become more than just ideals but actions in your own life? Because justice is not solely the responsibility of the courts. It's something we must all strive for every single day.